listening to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network, the nonprofit organization that strives to address the staggering disparity in resource availability for individuals suffering from mental health disorders, processing disorders, addictions, trauma healing, and sexual identity challenges. Together, we strive to end the stigma associated with these challenges so that true healing can begin. Welcome back to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network. I'm your host, and welcome you to episode number 57. Today's guest is Jeff Breedlove, who serves as Community Outreach Manager for Commissioner Kevin Tanner at the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. Jeff also serves on the Board of Directors for the Georgia School of Addiction Studies and the Regional Advisory Board for the RX Summit. This episode we've broken into two parts, so come back next Saturday for episode 59, part 2. So what do we talk about? Well, together we delved into Jeff's journey to recovery from addiction and shared our experiences about the deep-rooted stigma and discrimination that individuals with addiction face. We emphasize the need for advocacy and change in how addiction is perceived and treated. We highlight the importance of understanding addiction as a disease and supporting individuals in their recovery journeys, as well as the importance of connection and community in recovery. Jeff shares his personal story to highlight the power of sharing personal experiences to inspire and support others. He also explains the role of peers in recovery and their integration into healthcare settings. He discusses the need to build a strong behavioral health workforce and advocates for policy changes and advocacy for mental health and addiction. Jeff encourages individuals to speak up and advocate for change in their communities, the power of the voice of lived experiences. We cover the role of advocacy, making a case for addiction recovery, and the importance of participating in democracy to bring about change. We emphasize the need to pay it forward and be grateful for the support we received while highlighting the possibility of recovery and the importance of self-love. Finally, by the end of the two-part series, we share our passions for education on the existence of multiple pathways to recovery and the importance of never giving up. Okay, so more about Jeff. In the past, Jeff has served as Chief of Staff for DeKalb County Commissioner Nancy Jester, Senior Staff Member to Congressman Bob Barr in the historic 104th Congress, and again on the 105th Congress, Deputy Director for the Governor's Office of Workforce Development for Governor Nathan Deal, Policy Analyst for the Georgia State Senate. Jeff was also announced as a member of the 2023 Atlanta Business Chronicle's Power 10 healthcare list as one of Georgia's 10 most powerful healthcare leaders. Congratulations, Jeff. Jeff was awarded a personal proclamation from Governor Brian Kemp in September of 2023 as an outstanding advocate for peer-led recovery in Georgia. Jeff was awarded the Eric Allen Recovery Advocate of the Year for Georgia and has received numerous recovery leadership awards from organizations across Georgia, my home state. He was selected to serve as a volunteer for the G8 Summit on Sea Island, Georgia. He has served as Staff Vice Chair for the National Conference of State Legislators on the Transportation Committee and as a member of the Council of State Governments Southern Legislative Conference Committee on Economic Development, Transportation, and Cultural Affairs. He's a busy man. Jeff also served as a Georgia State Director for the American Council of Young Political Leaders, and he was the former Georgia State Director of Sister Cities International and a City of Atlanta Sister City Commission member. Jeff served as a commissioner and assistant scoutmaster with the Boy Scouts and served as PTA president at Imagine International Academy and vice president of the PTA at Maynard Jackson High School. Jeff is married to Catherine, and they reside in Grant Park, a neighborhood in Atlanta, Georgia. They have a son, Lawrence Foster Jack Breedlove, who was born in the People's Republic of China. He's a person in long-term recovery with a passion for sharing his story so others know recovery is real. I'm super excited because I'm moving back to Atlanta and I get to meet Jeff in real life, not just in this podcast. Oh, I'm so stoked. Okay, so enough of this. Let's do it. But first, let's remember those 3 C's of engagement. Number 1, click that subscribe button, click the notifications, go ahead and love, like, 5-star review this podcast. It really, really helps. The second C, commit to staying for the full episode. And I ask that you commit to following the second episode, which will release next Saturday. And the third C, what is it? Well, of course, it's your coffee. So fill up your coffee, sit back, relax, and let's get started. Okay, let's do it.
So I'm Jeff Breedlove. I'm a person in long-term recovery, and what that means for me is that it's been 7 years that I've known the hope and joy of recovery after 30 years of the hell of active addiction. My drug of choice was crack cocaine. It's the only drug I ever really did. I tried a couple of things here or there. One time, nothing else worked for me, and I've never really drank a full glass of anything alcoholic. So that was my drug of choice. That whole time that I was doing that, and I always tell people this, that I'm old. So this started in 30 years ago. We did not have the same smart technology, the same smartphones we did. So how we utilized time and how we could lie and manipulate was very different. I mean, now there's an app on my phone. My son's in Virginia. I know exactly where he is. We didn't have that back then. So I learned how to lie a lot and manipulate a lot. So I started when I was 20 years old, and I was in government and politics the entire time. That's been my professional career. And I was so sick, and this gets to the reason why. I had the great privilege of working for a number of members of Congress, and one of them was on the House Judiciary Committee, and the Speaker of the House was working closely with him on a crime bill in 1995. And my boss had been a former U.S. attorney. And so we're looking very closely at this crime bill. And there was a section in the crime bill that gave mandatory minimum sentences of 20 years or more for crack cocaine possession. No other drugs, mind you, just my drug.
Oh my gosh.
And I just looked straight at my boss with a straight face and said, "Oh, this is great. Absolutely, sir. No problems with this." Because I didn't want my boss, a member of Congress, the former U.S. attorney, who had prosecuted the Medellin drug cartel, to get any glimpse that I might have any problem with that. So I advised a member of Congress to tell the Speaker of the House that that provision of the bill was just great. If I had been arrested, I could go to jail for 20 years. That's how sick I was. And my addiction, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, went on for 30 years. And when I ended up getting arrested and being charged with a felony, and I go to the best treatment facility in the world, that was the path I needed. Support multiple pathways to recovery. I needed this path. But initially, they were talking about anonymity, and that's great. I'm sure we'll talk about that too. But I lived on Google at that point. All my arrest stories were out there. My favorite headline is "The Crackhead Chief of Staff Arrested." And I vowed that if I ever found this thing called recovery, if I ever could figure this out, that I may never get to run a campaign again or do some things I'd done before, but I was going to do something to address my issue. And I've learned a lot since then. I've learned about all my brothers and sisters in recovery and this wonderful recovery community we have across America. But at the time, I'm just a guy sitting in a treatment center going, I don't know what's going to happen, but if I get into this recovery thing, I'm going to use the skills I learned in government or politics to address this issue. So that's why I do it, was because, I was so sick that I was telling members of Congress, sure, put me in jail for 20 years. And I'm like, that's just not right. And we've treated this disease, stigma is such a nice word for hate and discrimination. That's all stigma really is. And I wanted to change things.
I'm going to remember that stigma is a nice word for hate and discrimination. Actually, I'm going to write it down because I keep saying I'm going to remember some of these things and I'm going to steal it as well.
Right.
I'm really good at stealing brilliant things from people. So I'm going to write down hate and discrimination. And I hope by saying this a few times for listeners, that stigma is just a nice word for it, that it also sinks into your head, because I think that is so powerful. I actually had not thought about it until you just said it, but stigma has kind of become like a coined phrase or something that we're used to that might have lost the power in it. By saying it, we might become desensitized to that word.
Well,
And
I
it
agree.
is.
I mean, it's too diplomatic. It's too nice. And I mean, the worst stigma in the United States is not at the federal government or the local or state government, but it's at local government levels. Now, take my home state of Georgia. And there's a map behind me, everybody, right there.
Yeah.
Where we took a Recovery Month bus to all those highlighted counties this past September. Thank you to Governor Brian Kemp and Commissioner Kevin Tanner at our state authority for letting us do that. But look, in these 159 counties and 530 cities, we certainly have many counties and cities that welcome addiction recovery, that welcome addiction treatment, and that work on addiction prevention. We certainly do. But we have many that don't. And where they exercise that hate and discrimination is at the local level, coded in zoning laws. So they will utilize zoning laws to keep addiction treatment facilities out, to keep recovery housing out. And they'll just change the law or make the zoning rule up once they get an application. And so we have some folks, again, that welcome us, and we thank everybody across America in any community that welcomes addiction into their community, because we should be welcome just like a cancer center is welcome, just like a center to treat ALS or AIDS is welcome. Our centers, our medical centers should be welcome too. But when they're not, it's not really stigma. It's really discrimination and hate, saying we don't want those people to come to our community because they bring crime and they will steal from us. And I've had people testify to that to my face at the local level in communities across Georgia, that you people will come in here and cause crime and steal from us.
So you know what word, Jeff, I want to add to our new stigma definition is hate, discrimination, and ignorance.
Sure.
Because if you have anyone who's been in so many treatment centers, individuals in treatment centers literally come from all walks of life. If you look at individuals who have addiction issues, it is not just those that we want to stereotype in that. You have CEOs of companies, you have politicians, you have people from all walks of life. So it reminds me, I'm also a Georgia girl, and it reminds me of back in the day when in some of the nice suburbs, they didn't want to put sidewalks in because they didn't want people walking in the sidewalks. So now you have these gorgeous suburbs or these gorgeous areas of Atlanta that would be so much better with sidewalks if they just put sidewalks in. Or they didn't want to take MARTA, which listeners from around the world, MARTA is a public transportation, when they limited where they were going to take it for this idea they didn't want people coming into the city and they didn't want to bring. So these are all ignorant statements without realizing what the reality is. And then the second thing is, because we have listeners from all backgrounds, the idea of how recovery housing is that there is so much research that shows that individuals who go into a treatment center, so let's just say they go into a 30-day rehab, the individuals who then have the ability to leave that treatment center and go into what's called like a sober living home, instead of going directly into their high stress home environment that hasn't changed at all, if they have the ability to go into some type of housing with individuals that are also being monitored and all this kind of stuff, so they extend that recovery period and they have that transition period, their success of long-term recovery is so much higher. So the idea that some of these individuals who come from all walks of life might not be able to get into housing in the community they need to live and work in because that community might not zone for recovery housing is so insane if
Oh,
you actually know the demographics of this.
Well, it's not just insane and all that. It's also not a smart use of taxpayer dollars. I mean, there's story after story, example after example. And I am proud of this. I mean, there has been great movement, at least in Georgia, and I know in other states too, of where our friends in law enforcement are changing their perspective on how to address people that they encounter in active addiction and with mental health issues. And we've formally done that with some legislation in Georgia. And I've been down to the Georgia Public Safety Training Center and spoken to officers about our new crisis intervention teams in Georgia. And so there is change going on, to be sure. But, you know, there are sheriffs and police chiefs that have come to realize you take a person in active addiction and you arrest them, put them in jail, run the cost up to the county and city, and they just go through this cycle over and over and over again. And it's just costing the local taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so it's like, well, if we try a new approach, maybe treatment and recovery, and it's not a get out of jail free card. It's not to say there's no consequences. And I'm not talking about somebody that may have caused bodily harm to somebody else. But here's an example. I mean, we have a county in Georgia called Polk County, and it's a kind of a rural county. There's two cities there, Cedartown and Rockmart, and the chiefs in both cities and the sheriff, there was this guy, just an old guy, and he kept regularly taking one bottle of vodka out of the local liquor store. Now, look, it's not okay to steal from the guy that runs the local liquor store, but he never would hurt anybody. He never took anything else. They knew who the guy was, and he was getting arrested over and over. And finally, the owner of the liquor store and the sheriff and police chief are like, what are we going to do? This thing just keeps happening. Well, they heard that we had a recovery community center there, an RCO, Recovery Community Organization. And the sheriff just said, I'm just going to take this guy next time I get him in custody. I'm going to go to the call next time this happens. And instead of taking him to jail, I'm going to take him there. And so they took him there and they talked to our recovery peers. They're all peers, and said, what can we do to help this guy? And they came up with a protocol. And the sheriff looked at the guy and said, look, you're not going to jail tonight. As long as you do what they tell you to do. Well, this guy, it didn't work the first time. It didn't work the second time, but it did work the third time. And he started getting into recovery. And this man is in recovery today. He no longer steals. He got a job and he became a taxpayer. So instead of Polk County and Cedartown spending money on the same guy over and over and over again, they said, let's just maybe try this different approach. And now the guy's a taxpayer. Instead of costing them money, he's saving them money and contributing to the economy. He's healthy, he's happy. And they broke that cycle. And so you don't always need legislation to do it. Sometimes it's just some local people working together saying, how do we deal with this here? And recovery, look, addiction is very real. And for those that don't know this, we're at historic numbers of deaths, especially to opioids. Last year, 109,000 souls in America died. And I'll tell you what that means in the real world. In Atlanta, we have the home of the Atlanta Braves, a big stadium. We have the home of the Atlanta Hawks, a big arena, and we have the Mercedes-Benz Dome, which is the home to Atlanta United football and the Atlanta Falcons football, a big arena. Those are three huge arenas. If all three of those sold out on the same Sunday with three different games going on, we're just under 109,000 seats. So think about that. If your biggest sports arenas were all filled in your hometown on the same day, and everybody in there died, what would happen? CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and in London Sky News and wherever you get your news, they'd stop programming and they'd say, oh my gosh, what a great tragedy that all these people died in these arenas. But they don't do that for our disease. So this is an epidemic. And it's killing people at historic rates. But as real as addiction is, recovery is real. The Biden administration, SAMHSA, just announced recently that the recovery numbers went up from 24,000 Americans that they know to 29 million Americans that they know in recovery, working through their disease. and celebrating recovery. And we know there's people in anonymity, so we know there's more than 29 million. So if you know that addiction's real, my message to you is that recovery is real too.
Oh, I love that. And I got chills because being that I've been in all three of those stadiums, and I've been in many Atlanta United games that are sold out, and I can think of the presence of how electric that environment feels with a whole bunch of living, excited souls, and what the exact opposite of that would be with all of those souls lost to such a tragic addiction. And that's super powerful. A couple of things that you commented on that I want to make sure listeners understand. One is this idea of crisis intervention units. And if listeners, if you go back and listen, I interviewed Chancellor of UC Davis in California, Gary May, who used to be Dean of Engineering at Georgia Tech. That's how I've known him for a long period of time. But UC Davis in California has just done an amazing job. We talked about mental health in the college community, and they've done an amazing job of completely revamping their crisis intervention programs so that if there is an intervention that needs to happen, whether it doesn't matter if it's, drug addiction, mental health, whatever, then the individuals coming and seeing them are not all geared up like police officers, and they come and they've been trained appropriately on how to handle these situations. And they don't have this mindset that they need to hurry up and arrest the individual, take them to an emergency room, because they either need to take them to the emergency room or jail. And oftentimes it's faster to take them to jail because they don't have to wait at jail. They can just drop them off, but they have to wait in the emergency room, right? And so I do know, and I do recall, I don't know the stats, you know the stats. So I'm going to throw out raw stuff that I don't have substantiated, and then you can confirm or deny and say, I don't know what I'm talking about. I do know that there have been some counties in Georgia that have put a focus on doing this extra crisis intervention training for their police departments to try and mitigate what we already know is a challenge for these reoccurring things, and how you could have someone who is having an episode, and if you come at them as if you're a member of the police and you have these agenda and you're not properly trained. And I want to say that I'm not saying this is a judgment of anyone who's trying to do their job. I think a lot of it is not having that proper crisis intervention training, and want to give kudos to those local areas that have said, no. We now see the research, we see the stats. We need to set our teams up for success and give them this training. And when given that training, then those individuals, because what success, so the episode that we just released this past Saturday, where Ben Daines and I talked about prevalence of mental health challenges pre and post COVID. We did a review of an article out of World Psychiatry, and we talked about, I love this, how now my brain is like, what was I going to say? See, listeners, this is how you know I'm not always on top of my game. It's the end of the day in Los Altos, California. Let me think for a minute. It'll come to me in a minute. So remind me for a second what I was just saying.
Well, we were talking about crisis intervention and how different police officers are reacting.
Yeah. Serenity. I had something super powerful that I wanted to say in that instance.
Well,
I don't remember what it was.
Let me say something about officers and people in active addiction. So when I was arrested in 2016, I was the chief of staff to a county commissioner in DeKalb County, Georgia, which is a big county in the heart of Metro Atlanta with all the Atlanta TV coverage you could ever want. And my commissioner was on the news. It's not an exaggeration to say 4 nights a week out of 5. And she focused a lot on law enforcement and first responders and public safety stuff. So, I'm her chief of staff. So I've done all these police ride-alongs, fire department ride-alongs. And by the way, one of the most emotional things I've ever done is I sat through an 8-hour shift with a 911 operator where I could hear what the calls were and boy, what a tough job our 911 operators do. Very emotional job. Paramedic ride-along. So I've done all these kind of things. And, whether it's a 26-year-old police officer who I did a ride-along with, or a veteran who's maybe in his 50s and been on this, working the community for a long time, look, they all have families, and they just want to go home at night and see their family. and they put themselves in harm's way, and sometimes they get a bad rap, whatever. I just know this: they're human beings trying to do a job. And when they show up to a situation, they don't know. I've done the simulators where does that person have a gun hidden or not? And are they going to kill you or not? So we've got to understand that they are in a life and death situation that there's no instant replay for them if they guess wrong. So I get that. But that also doesn't mean that this mentality of lock them up, throw away the key, everybody's got to go to jail is correct. Nobody, first of all, addiction is a brain disease. It's not a sin to have a disease. And good people get bad diseases, and nobody should go to jail simply because they have a disease. So those are some things. So on the one hand, we understand that officers have to do things to protect themselves and others when we're in public making actions that may not be safe for others. I get that. But once they've secured the situation, that's when the choice, and that's where crisis intervention teams come in. Officers have in Georgia a wonderful protocol where they can, and it's all legal now. And by the way, we've expanded those local tests. It's now statewide law, and every jurisdiction in Georgia is getting trained.
And that makes me so happy.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, it takes a while to train all the police jurisdictions in a state. There's 700 police jurisdictions in Georgia, counting the colleges and everything. So it takes a while to train that many, but they're getting trained, and they get to make that choice, and they can call a doctor using technology from literally the side of the road. And a doctor can join in the evaluation and say, yes, if you're saying you don't necessarily want to take this person to jail, I certify also you can take them to a crisis intervention unit. And so that person that night may not go to jail, and they may get medical treatment, which, is great. Some nights you're going to go to jail if you caused harm to others or you've broken into a store. I mean, having a disease is also not a get out of jail free card, but it used to be 100% go to jail, and that's not acceptable. And now there's at least some discretion in Georgia law. And I encourage other states, I encourage other countries. You've got to look at these models, not just in Georgia, but other states that are investing in the training for law enforcement and the technology for law enforcement and the medical community. And look, it takes time to work these bills out because, for example, it could theoretically take 8 hours from the sheriff's deputy to transport that person from where they are to the crisis intervention unit, wait until the medical staff say, yeah, we're okay with you leaving, and go back home. And a sheriff will say, look, first of all, I don't have it in my budget to drive this guy to the closest thing an hour away and back. That's 2 hours of gas. Somebody's got to pay for that. And then you're taking my deputy off of rotation for 5 to 6, 7 hours. What do I tell my constituents back home when somebody's house gets broken into? So we all want these things, but I tell you, the legislative process, you get down into every minute detail of every stakeholder impacted. Then you get down to what did the doctors and nurses need and do, and how much does that cost? So all this transformational change, it costs money, and we have to figure out how we pay for it. But it's our voice, it's the peer voice, it's the family voice that has to speak up on podcasts like these, at our city council meetings, at our county commissions meetings, at our state capitals, and yes, in Congress, in Washington, or at Parliament, or wherever your government is, and say, we expect addiction to be treated like a disease, and we want professional medical solutions to these disease. The answer is not just throw everybody in jail.
I love that. And it's funny because I'll listen to this recording and then remember what I wanted to say that I can't, which I still love, but I'm going to leave it in because the reality is sometimes when you're so passionate about something, your brain is going 90 to nothing. One of the things I was thinking about though, Ben and I did talk about, and you mentioned this, is that without these opportunities for success, so basically without these things, we're setting up every single situation for failure. We know that. We've seen this before. It's failure upon failure upon failure. It is costing way more money for these failures versus if we do an ROI analysis of how much it would save us long term if we could. And a key of what Ben and I talked about on Saturday was return people to active contributing members of society. Very much like you were talking about the individual in Polk County who is now a taxpayer. He's not an N of one. He's one example you gave who is one of many. Right. Ben and I talked about both of us in our unique situations. Neither one of us, after, my trauma and his grief after losing his daughter, neither one of us were able to be contributing members of society at that point. And we needed our own sort of recovery in that instance to be able to now, and now we're both very much, he's about to be an emergency department doctor with his passion in mental health, to be one of those individuals who's receiving those mental health patients coming in. And he knows that background. He knows that passion, right? So he is now a contributing member of society. He is one of the founding members of RAN and a board member. And, the same for me. And so I think the reality is it ties back, Jeff, to something you said early on, is that it is very easy to look at, all of these people who are addicted and forget about the powerful recovery stories. And really, if we can remember those recovery stories and think about, okay, wait, let's not continue to make the same mistakes that we made for these individuals that continue in the addiction. Let's figure out how to correct the parts of the system that we can, even if it's in bite-sized pieces. And that's what it is. It's in bite-sized pieces. What can we do one step at a time that's going to have the biggest ROI that's going to play out in the future? Because the more of those that we can turn into these amazing recovery stories, and I will tell you this, some of my favorite people in the world are former addicts or former people who've been in treatment. Actually, quite frankly, some of the men I know who are most in touch with their emotions are ones who have gone through all the 12-step programs, right? So
yeah, well, you're right about that. We celebrate, rightly so, breast cancer survivors. Now I want you to think about this. Back in the 50s after World War II, we're talking about mostly white men. They come home from the war. A lot of them had lived in rural America. Now they're getting these corporate jobs in these big cities, and they get to buy a house for the first time. It has electricity for the first time, indoor plumbing for the first time. They get a car, they get a radio or a black and white TV. A lot of folks in rural America had never seen this stuff before the war. Now these men, it's usually men in the 50s, they're getting these jobs. And a lot of these men kind of get really sick and they die of something, but they won't do anything about it because there's discrimination, there's stigma. And it's because most insurance companies after World War II didn't cover this thing called cancer. And in the media, they would write the C word because you would never tell your boss you had cancer because your boss would fire you and hire the next guy because there were so many guys unemployed after the war that if your boss found out, none of those benefits for your wife and kids. And so men were just working until they couldn't work anymore. And people were dying. Well, that was the 50s. Now go all the way to where we are today. Okay. We have the biggest retailers in America, Target and Walmart. They basically are selling shirts at cost.
Delta.
Well, yeah, but take the retailers. They'll sell you a shirt with a pink ribbon on it. They're not making money off those shirts. They're just saying, here, kind of take this shirt and go say you support breast cancer. And the national pastime is still baseball. It's not soccer yet. It's still baseball. and MLB every season puts blue stuff on all the players and the umpires, and they do prostate cancer. The national pastime celebrates cancer now to say, hey, we celebrate survivors. We openly identify with this disease, and we want you to contribute and help us find a cure. So cancer's gone from people dying to the biggest parts of America celebrating them. Take AIDS. I was in high school when AIDS started.
Same here.
The parents at my school had meetings with the school principal about, we've heard that a virus can travel through the air conditioning system at the school and our kids are going to die. We went from that kind of ignorance and stigma to today in 2024, AIDS is the number one disease funded by the U.S. Congress, and Republicans and Democrats fight with each other over who's funding it the most. And those things didn't happen accidentally. advocates for the cancer community came together and started working together, and so did the AIDS community years later, in a bipartisan manner, in a professional manner, and targeted government and business and faith and education and law enforcement and clubs like Rotary and Kiwanis, and said, we're going to take this message that you're going to stop discriminating against people with these diseases, and you're going to give them money, you're going to have laws that help them, don't hurt them. That's where our community is right now. We are somewhere between the 1980s for AIDS and the 1950s for cancer, and where both those communities are now. We're in between. We have not earned what they've earned. And I do want everybody who ever wants to advocate to understand this. The world's not going to give you anything. You've got to go make your case. You've got to go over and over and over, advocate and speak up and speak out and say, these are people. They're not statistics. They deserve what they deserve. They deserve funding. They deserve laws that help them, programs that help them. And that's what I think we're seeing right now. I think we're in the midst of this beautiful awakening where family members and advocates are speaking up. And I think we're making progress. We have some ways to go. And I know internationally, I follow a lot of it. I know there's stuff going on around the world in different stages, from Africa to the Middle East to the UK in particular, even over in Japan and in the Philippines. People are starting discussions, and we still have a long way to go in America and Canada for sure. But I do think we're on the track to victory. So I implore you, every family's been impacted by this. Find someplace locally and do what they did for cancer, do what they did for AIDS, and find a way to speak up, speak out, and advocate for people who have been impacted by it.
Wow, that is so powerful. And I'm thinking about the word earned, right? And I'm thinking back in history, like, first off, it's sad that we have to think about it as earned, because when we think of like women weren't allowed to vote, African Americans weren't, like all of these things that now in 2024 we think are insane. But in that time, as you mentioned, it seemed like, oh yeah, this is the way that it is. And it's completely logical, despite that it wasn't. I want to throw into this mix. So episode 13, I interviewed Chrissy Clark, the director of Ripple Ranch, and we talked about the link between childhood trauma and addiction. And what I want to say out, and I have said this repeatedly on this podcast, no one says, when they're writing their note to the tooth fairy, what I want to do when I grow up is be a meth addict. No one says that, okay? No one's, and I have said repeatedly, when I was 15 in high school, and, I had severe childhood trauma and childhood abuse. And I remember when I was 15 in high school, seeing girls in the bathroom shooting up drugs. And I remember I was lucky because I knew that because my dad was an alcoholic, I had other people in my family that were alcoholics. I knew I had an addictive personality. And I've since later in life struggled with alcohol abuse. And I knew that if I tried drugs, that I was terrified. I would immediately get addicted and I would probably be on the street as a prostitute and dead at this stage. And so when I talk and talk to other people, I don't judge someone who is in this stage of their life, because I know it was one glimpse of one decision I made that I could have very easily made the other decision. It's not like trust me, listeners, I made lots of poor decisions when I was 15. I didn't sit and think. I just had this terrifying moment, and I was lucky that I had that. And there are so many other people that don't have that, because if you go back and listen to that episode, and Josh Young talks about it, his craving recovery. Josh is now a board member. He manages our blog series, and he talks about going into alcohol addiction recovery. He's written several books about it, and he had severe childhood abuse. And it wasn't until that underlying abuse that was dealt with that he could fully recover from that alcohol addiction. So we also talk in many episodes about trying to get recovery centers that aren't just trying to take away whatever that one substance is that's your current fix for the problem, but trying to find where those underlying challenges are. So I just want to implore individuals who look at someone and say, oh, you're an addict, that means you're weak. That means, you're irresponsible. That means all of these things. No, it doesn't. Okay. It means this individual is a human and you have no idea what they've gone through and you have no idea what they're trying to cope through to get to the next day, and how powerful each of these different types of drugs, whether it is, opiates, narcotics, alcohol, if it's eating disorders, if it's self-harm, if it's sex addiction, if it's gambling, if it's shopping, if it's any of these types of things, right? These are some sort of addiction that is masking these underlying challenges that none of these individuals chose. Therefore, these are not crimes that these individuals have these things, and they deserve healing in the exact same way that, the individuals who have cancer didn't choose to have cancer, and, all of these. And I just think understanding that, I kind of cringe at the idea of having to earn something, but I get that that's kind of the society we're at. We have to advocate.
It is. We have to advocate. We have to speak up and speak out because of that stigma. I mean, there is a bias against those people. And listen, I was last General Assembly session this last year. There was a bill before a Senate committee, and I was testifying in support of the bill. And a person, God bless them, I'm sure they're a great American. She got up to testify, and she violated all kinds of rules. But hey, look, she's just a taxpayer. She wasn't like a lobbyist. She came down and she said, look, Jeff Breedlove just wants this bill to pass so all he and his addict friends can get the taxpayers to pay for all their crimes and to buy them drugs. I mean, she said that and said my name at a committee hearing. Now, the chairman, I've known the chairman for a long time, and that is against the rules. And he looked at me and I was like going, no, let her talk. And so then he calls me up there, and I just kind of paused and I said, I understand her. Because when I was in active addiction, I didn't understand it either. And maybe she's got somebody in her family. I don't know, but this is impacting her. And I said, we need to pray for her, because let me tell you what, there may be some things I did in active addiction that I had to make some amends for. And in civilian talk, that means apologize for. It's not what an amends is, but civilians don't know what an amends is.
Right.
I said, but I got news for you, ma'am. Having a disease is not a sin. And if you say you're pro-faith, down in the South, a lot of Christians, hey, Jewish, Muslim, it doesn't matter. If you say you're a believer in a faith, well, guess what? Be a believer in a faith. And having a disease is not a sin in any faith. I've talked to imams and rabbis and Protestants and Catholic leaders, and I've talked to Buddhist and Hindu and Taoist leaders. It's not a sin to have a disease. So stop with the hypocrisy. And let me tell you this. Childhood trauma, most addiction cases, the experts will tell you, started with some sort of childhood trauma. And so mine is the worst in the world because it was mine, and I've learned to respect mine. But I also know objectively, if we were, being objective, mine certainly was not the worst in the world of people I know, my personal friends who have been through traumas. But mine was mine. And mine was that I was a pretty good high school football player, and I decided to quit playing high school football. A girl may have been involved. And I had been recruited by a couple of colleges, and I probably would have gotten a scholarship. And so my dad just never laid a finger on me, but he just quit talking to me. And I'm living at home in the 80s at a suburban home, and I got a dad who just won't talk to me. Literally. And I started skipping school before I did drugs when I was finishing up high school. And I didn't analyze any of this when I was younger. But when I went to MAR, and I got to shout out MAR in Atlanta, Georgia, MAR saved my life. And at MAR, they ask, and they divide.
And MAR is for those who don't know, it's a treatment center in Atlanta.
Treatment center. MAR treatment center. MAR, check them out. They're all over social media. Look, they divide the men and women. That's great. So I'm at the men's program, and they challenge the men to do a life story. Now, I jokingly say there's a bias in a life story because the older you are, the longer the story, and you got to write more than the younger guys. And I'm like, come on, guys. But that's my attempt at humor on a very serious matter. So some of my I was very blessed. I had some roommates that at the time had been there longer than me, and they were taking this time seriously. And they were like, Jeff, you really just write the freaking story, man, and be honest. And you had to write it because you can't have laptops at MAR. And so you're handwriting. This is over 100 pages. I'm 50 years old, and I've been in government politics. I'm writing all these things down. And then you get in a circle of men. And look, men and women are different. And I don't know how women do it in their circles, but it's hard for men to talk about their feelings. I actually think, in all seriousness, that's part of men's diagnosis in active addiction and mental health issues is our inability to process feelings. But that's a long story. But I bared my soul to a group of men talking about the pain I felt about what happened between my dad and I. And 3 days later, MAR pulled me out of a meeting, which MAR never does. And I knew I hadn't broken any rules or anything. And they set me down in the head of the men's program office and told me that my dad had just had a heart attack and was going to die. Now, you understand that my dad was the central issue of my life story. That was the thing. MAR's going to get the family counselor. My dad and I are going to have all this counseling, and we're going to work this out. And I'm like, okay. I'm just saying, okay. God, my higher power, the Christian God, had a different plan. So it's also very humbling when you're at a serious treatment facility because they don't just say, hey, your dad's about to die. See ya. You can go do what you want to do. I had to ask for permission to go to the hospital. But that was part of breaking the arrogant guy down and making him humble and respect some rules. So my roommates and I, we go out to the hospital. Well, here, check this out. One of those roommates, this is a God thing, is a cardiologist. Dr. Mike. Dr. Mike is on staff at a prestigious university in a state named Kentucky, and he's a cardiologist. And Dr. Mike, of course, is with me and talks to the nurse. I'm pretty sure he didn't tell the nurse he was in a treatment center, but he told the nurse he was a cardiologist, and she let him see my dad's papers. And Dr. Mike says, I'm telling you, your dad can hear you. You need to go talk. You need to. Well, it's one-sided. I mean, he couldn't respond back. Now, I'm trying to believe that he could hear me, but I'm just trying to process some of these feelings that I just shared in a circle with my dad, who's laying on literally his deathbed. I mean, he was on life support, and it was just a question of time. And that was hard because in recovery doesn't make life perfect. The only thing that changes in recovery isn't life throwing us life. It's how we deal with what life throws us. And that was the beginning for me. And speaking of Georgia Tech, and you'll love this. So my dad, big Georgia Tech fan, at the South, it's very common to have the funeral home visits, and I did get to go to that. Now, I will tell y'all this. I did not take my suit to the treatment center.
Right.
And we're in the South, and my mom's very Southern, and so I'm like,
you have to wear a suit.
I have to wear a suit for the funeral, right? That's what you do.
Yes.
So I tell MAR, they're like, yeah, your wife can bring the suit to the funeral home, and we'll check it for drugs to make sure, she's not bringing just some crack cocaine and all of that. Well, we get to the funeral home. My dad, and I didn't know this, my dad there, is in a Georgia Tech windbreaker and khakis. He's not in a suit. So, yeah, I know, but it gets better. So we go back to the apartment at the treatment center. Guys, we don't gossip and chit-chat in the apartment. And the three guys I live with are chit-chatting. It's very uncommon. And I'm not included. So finally, I'm like, what are you people talking about? And these three grown adults 26, and then a couple of 50-year-old guys, say, well, we got a problem. What? Well, none of us have a suit. And we'll be with you at this little country church, and it'll be pretty obvious something's going on with us. I didn't care. I'm still in treatment. I haven't entered into recovery. I haven't changed how I care about people. But that was a spark in my recovery too, because I kind of like these guys. And I'm like, find myself with this strange feeling of actually caring about what they're telling me. But I'm scared to death of my mom, mind you. But I started thinking and praying. And I did have a little bit of extended phone privileges during this time. And I called my mom, and I think for the first time in my life, tried to solve a problem, not from a political point of view, to the benefit of a candidate or client, but to actually help humans. And here's what I said to Mom. I said, Mom, I'm giving the eulogy. And I'm thinking about Dad, and I got some things I want to say. And, he's in the Georgia Tech windbreaker and khakis. I'm wondering how you would feel if I wear my Georgia Tech sweatshirt and khakis and incorporate some remarks. I was scared to live in death, people, that I was going to get this Southern tirade of, you're a disrespectful son who doesn't understand.
Right.
She started crying. Good cry.
Aww.
And said, oh, that would be such a wonderful tribute. He would love that. And of course, I go and I did it, and I gave a eulogy in that, and I explained it, and everybody at the church thought it was great and all that stuff. But that was a turning moment in my own recovery, because I realized that if I actually cared about people, I could find solutions that benefited everybody, and turns out make it better for me too. So there's a little Georgia Tech connection in my recovery.
I love that.
Tragically with my dad's passing, but that all goes back to childhood trauma that started in high school, led to that moment in treatment, at a funeral. It's all tied together. And let me just wind down by saying this for that story. I've learned the past 7 years in recovery something that maybe no one's told you. If you're in active addiction out there, or if you're in recovery, I want you to know this. The opposite of addiction isn't sobriety. It's connection.
Connection.
The opposite of addiction is connection. And I started connecting to men. I want you to understand this too. I go to MAR, right? It's like the Betty Ford Center of the Southeast, Joe. It's really good. And I go to this admissions meeting, and the lady's talking to my wife, and they're not even talking to me. I'm just sitting in the room. Now, remember, I've been charged with a felony. I've been fired in the news. I'm unemployed, felony charge. My wife hasn't divorced me. She did not divorce me. We stayed married. Spoiler alert. But she certainly at that point in time doesn't care about anything I have to say, right?
Right.
And finally, at the very end of this admissions meeting, the lady at MAR says, well, do you have any questions? And I'm like, yeah, I'm the guy that's going to be here. And the first words out of my mouth are, well, I guess I'll come here, like I'm doing them a favor, but I'd like the program with my own apartment. And she just laughed and laughed. I'm pretty sure that's not in the MAR Human Resources Handbook. And she's like, Jeff, we do community. That's all part of it. There's no amount of money you can pay where we're going to let you have your own apartment. It just doesn't work that way. And that was another humbling learning lesson, but I didn't understand. And as much as the meeting in the classrooms at MAR was important, the recovery really happened in those apartments with other guys. And that's what sustained me for 7 years is connecting with either brothers and sisters in recovery, somebody in active addiction, a family member, a stakeholder who wants to know more about it. It's just connecting with people. So I just want to encourage you, if you're isolating, there's a whole community out there. And if Ange asked me, I'll tell you how I met the community. But you got a lot of brothers and sisters, or if you've lost someone to the disease, there's people that have survived the disease that want to help and talk to you. But when we connect with each other, we save lives, and we save our own lives.
And I'm dying because I'm in a different 12-step recovery program out here in Los Altos. And on our Thursday night meeting and the Sunday, I started our Sunday meeting and I'm about to move to Atlanta. So on Sunday, I'm talking to everyone. Okay, I need somebody else to step up and be the contact on the international website. It can't be my number. They can't be calling Atlanta for access to the meeting and all this kind of stuff, right? And in both of those meetings on Thursday and Sunday, we were talking about this. So I love when individuals in long-term sobriety talk about how important community is, because every bit of my sobriety in these areas has not been because I sat at home and just like grunt forced and read a book and did it all on my own. No, it is because I made so many amazing friends in recovery such that if I felt triggered, like I was tempted or whatever, I could reach out to them or they would reach out to me. And then that just kept me, like if someone did a program call to me one day, then I'm suddenly like, wow, I now feel like I can absolutely stay sober another day because that helped my recovery journey. And there's so much power in that. There's also so much power because when we're in isolation, we often believe that we're the only ones, that we're awful people, that we deserve this, that we will never get better, that no one can possibly understand. We believe all these lies, okay? And yet, if you are able to go into whatever your recovery community looks like, and I do want to hear how you found your recovery community, but if you're able to go into whatever your recovery community is, and listeners, I would encourage you, we used to say this when I went to rehab, we would say, okay, if you went to a bar and you didn't like that bar, you didn't stop going to bars. You just went to a different bar. So if you try one recovery type and you don't like it, don't stop recovery. Just go and try another meeting or another format or another thing like that. But when you do, is that, and I will say in this other program is mostly men. And I will say the level of vulnerability in the things that these men share openly in the room, it is absolutely amazing. It's so healing. And they're such amazing human beings. Like I would want them to be my coworkers. I would want them to be my boss. I would want, all of these things. I trust them when I'm having a challenge about even something not related to recovery. I can go to them. I mean, I will say this, I'm about to move back to Atlanta, and in California, there are only a few things that I miss. Well, one, I live in Los Altos and the weather is like 75 and sunny every day of the year. So I miss the weather. I'll miss the weather. There's no mosquitoes. So I will miss my church connections, and I will miss the people in my recovery community. Okay. I'm not going to miss my job. I'm not going to miss the taxes. I'm not going to miss the other things, but I will miss those things because those are the things that make my quality of life in all areas so much better. So I do want to hear how you found your recovery.
Well, I'll tell you that, but before we get serious.
Okay, yes, I did just do that to you listeners. I really love you. I did this on purpose because I want to make sure you come back next week for episode number 59, where Jeff will share all about how he found his recovery tribe, how you can find yours in your community, and how you can help build a program and make change in the world around you. So I hope you enjoyed this episode and my fun teaser, and we'll see you next week for episode 59. Thank you for joining us today with your coffee and conversation. We hope you've been encouraged and learned something from today's story. To learn more about today's guest, please check out our show notes for more details. Now it's time to remember to like this episode, subscribe, and turn on your notifications to ensure you do not miss future episodes. Recovery Advocate Network envisions a world where individuals with mental health challenges receive comprehensive and effective treatment without the worry of financial burdens to themselves or their families, all without the stigmas often present in society. We are proud that every individual worked with RAN does so on a 100% volunteer basis. You can support the mission by making a financial donation via PayPal or Venmo, or email donate@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org if you would like to donate items for our next fundraising auction. Please visit our website at www.recoveryadvocatenetwork.org to learn more. Now, stay in the loop about upcoming events, future episodes, and more by following us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter X, TikTok, LinkedIn, and all major podcast platforms. As a reminder, the experiences and advice expressed in this episode are the host and guest's own personal stories and do not represent the opinions of any organization mentioned. RAN is passionate about opening the doors for all voices and experiences, not just those expressed in any particular podcast. If you want to share your experiences or expertise, we encourage you to be a future guest by emailing us at podcast@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org or submit a blog by emailing blog@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org. We also encourage you to comment on the episode so that we can continue to provide content that is most beneficial to the community. How do you do that? Visit our website at www.recoveryadvocatenetwork.org, and in the top right corner, click that comment button and comment. So listeners, what do you need to do? Pause what you're doing, subscribe, follow us. Please give us a like and a 5-star rating, write some meaningful comments, and most importantly, share these episodes with your friends. You never know whose heart you will touch, so please be a part of a reason someone has new hope today. If this episode was triggering to you, we encourage you to contact your support system, therapist, national and community support groups, the Global Crisis Text Line by texting 741-741, and/or if in the U.S., dialing 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you're in the U.S. and need additional resources such as shelter, support group resources, transportation, food, and/or a safe, confidential path out of physical or emotional domestic abuse, please call 211 or visit www.211info.org for assistance. Now, we know you are very busy, and we are grateful that you said yes to sharing time with us today. If you stuck to our 3 C's of engagement and listened to the full episode, then visit the podcast section of our website and leave the comment about the podcast, and you'll be entered to win an autographed copy of one of the books from one of our book club series, as well as a Coffee and Conversation coffee mug. So thanks again. Until next time, back to your coffee.